Welcome. This is Bill Donahue with Discerning Truths, where I here talking to you 3 days a week about Jesus. 2 days a week we're in the books of the Bible, Monday and Wednesday. Fridays I usually do stuff that might be related to Christianity. It will be in some way related, sometimes barely. Like last Friday I talked about the Holy Grail and religious artifacts and the stories of Joseph Arimathea being in Britain and the Glastonbury tales. Not really solid theology, but it was kind of interesting history. So that's what I call Freaky Fridays. So sometimes I go there. Sometimes I do more traditional subjects on Friday. But Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at noon Pacific time. And we're in the book of Matthew. And I've been really spending some time driving home the point of intertextuality, where the oldest books in the Bible are Job and the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. Every writer in the Bible after that will quote, paraphrase, or allude to, or pull echoes, ideas from the earlier text and bring them forward to either ground what they're saying in that existing revelation, to show what they're saying isn't a different idea. It's what was always taught. Or to do that and then make a new theological point based on that earlier revelation. That's intertextuality. It really happens in the New Testament in a big way. And Jesus and the apostles do not interpret the Old Testament the way your pastors and I were taught to interpret the Bible in Bible college or seminary. That's a problem. That's a problem. And for people, and I'm trying to get you past that, because when you get into master's level theology and beyond, this becomes a big subject. But up until then, it's kind of like read the Bible like this. It's really hard. I want to take this out of the hands of the scholars and get it into your hands as a beginner, as an intermediate, wherever you're at in your Bible study, to give you these tools. Don't learn something wrong first and then get it corrected later. Let's just teach you the right way to read the Bible from the start with. Okay? So I've been more focused on that. And because I have, and I've had to break up these chapters because I can't get through one chapter in a sitting, I've been skipping over Bible difficulties. So in this chapter, I'm going to kind of hit some of these Bible difficulties and show you why one of the other things that I've been teaching you is that the biblical writers, especially New Testament writers, they wrote in the first century. They wrote the way first century writers wrote history and biography. We have extant textbooks from that time frame that teach people how to write. We have other examples of writers in the Greco-Roman world who wrote histories and biographies, what they called lives at the time, and they use these literary devices, these compositional devices. So I'm trying to get you past what a lot of these people are teaching. And I was in Neo's chat this morning, and Revolver made a comment in there that I'm going to probably steal it. I mean, it was so spot on that I may use this again often. And it's like copy and paste theology. Once somebody puts out an idea, people don't think about it. They just copy and paste that idea. And if you want to look smart, you just repeat what the other guy said. And you have this with the Q ideas, you have all this stuff. Well, along came these people starting to say that the Bible couldn't use these literary devices, these compositional devices. They can't do time compression. They can't take a monologue and turn it into a dialogue for literary devices. They can't do that because that wouldn't be truthfulness, according to their definition. And if you get rid of these ideas that are common in evangelical Christianity today, and let the biblical writers write the way first century writers wrote, these Bible difficulties simply vanish. Okay? And so that's why I'm going to do it today. So in my introduction, I want to show you a couple of them. Okay? We talked about in Matthew 26 about Jesus got arrested after the Passover dinner, very late at night. I said it doesn't give an exact time, but I says it would easily be after 10 p.m. and it wouldn't surprise me if it was after midnight or very early in the morning. Passover dinners are very long. And if you're practicing them the way the Bible says Passover is to be celebrated, that you kill the lamb at twilight when the evening begins, and then you have to butcher and cook and prepare the meal and then eat the meal between the evenings. It has to all be consumed. And in the original Exodus, it all had to be consumed before morning because at morning they left town. So when you're doing it all on the same day, instead of the way Jews traditionally do it, which is kill the lamb on Passover and then eat the meal on the Feast of Unleavened Bread the next day, it makes a very, very long meal. It's a very, very long day. You got the day getting ready, the day of preparation getting ready. You butcher the animal, you cook the animal, you eat the animal, you're singing songs, you're drinking wine, you're having a grand old time. It becomes a very late night party. He goes out into the Garden of Gethsemane, prays, begs for them to stay with them and stay awake and stay at watch. They keep falling asleep. Then Judas comes up and betrays them and takes them. And according to Matthew, they go to Caiaphas, right? And there's kind of a hearing, so to speak, not really a formal trial, but a hearing before Caiaphas. And they decide Jesus, they try to bring in false testimony against him and they do all. That's the thing. When you read Mark's account, it's a very similar nighttime description of what's going depiction. Luke says when day came, the assembly of the elders and people gathered together, and the chief priests and scribes, and then they led him away to their council. That indicates that it was after morning, not at nighttime when this trial happened or this initial stuff. And then John adds the detail that the initial questioning was by Annas, the former high priest. He's kind of like the high priest, honorary high priest, right, at night. And then the Caiaphas happens in the morning. And so what Matthew and Mark have done is compress those two events into one. and they make it seem like he went directly to Caiaphas. But John adds a detail that tells you, no, that nighttime stuff was before Annas. And then they go to Caiaphas. But John leaves out the whole the detail of it being the full Sanhedrin happening, and just has them going out into the morning. If you understand how they wrote in the first century, this is not a Bible difficulty, right? But it is presented as a Bible difficulty and a reason to not trust the Bible for being accurate, because they go, see, Matthew and Mark say it's at nighttime, and Luke and John said it was in the daytime. Matthew and Mark said they went to Caiaphas, and John says they went to Annas. Okay? So the scholars, Christian scholars, they propose two phases: an informal nighttime preliminary hearing that Matthew and Mark focuses on, followed by a formal morning ratification that Luke emphasizes, as Jewish law requires. In Mishnah Sanhedrin 4:1, they have a prohibition against capital trials at night. So even though they had the preliminary hearing kind of at night, they can't charge them with a capital crime unless they do it in the daytime. And so this views the Gospels as complementary, not contradictory. Now, dissenting critical views, Bart Ehrman and those kind of people, argue that this harmonization is without direct evidence. We're just assuming it can be harmonized, and I'll tell you flat out, I do assume the Bible is correct and it can be harmonized and it's not in contradicting each other. And they say that rather than go with that without direct evidence, that it's possibly they're reflecting different oral traditions, or that Luke redacted for theological reasons, right, to stress Jesus' innocence in a proper trial. So they're starting with a presupposition that the Bible is not truthful and is not accurate, probably wasn't written by the gospel writers. And I'm starting with the presupposition that it was the gospel writers, the apostles who wrote the gospels, and who said the names who were attested to, that's who wrote them, and that they were written in the lifetime of those apostles and they were being truthful. So we're starting with those. So my rebuttal to these critics is the solution we're offering is completely consistent with the compositional standards that we know were the norm in the first century. It's not a doubt, it's not up for speculation as to how they wrote in the first century. Like I said, textbooks from that time frame have survived. We know exactly how first century writers were taught to write. We know from other biographers like Plutarch that they did this, right? And I also skipped over the Bible difficulty, right, of the exact details surrounding Peter's denial. And this is something else that critics will throw in your face. In Matthew 26:69-75, Peter denies Jesus 3 times, first to a servant girl while sitting outside in the courtyard, second to another servant girl who tells the bystanders, third to the bystanders who note his accent. He weeps after the rooster crows. That's Matthew's scenario. Mark is very similar, but in Mark, the second servant girl is the same servant girl. And the third to the bystanders, and the rooster crows twice. Okay, not just once, the rooster crows twice. And Luke, first to the servant girl, we all agree on this one, right? Second to another man, not a girl, right? And third to another man, and Jesus looks at Peter before the crowing. So Luke adds some other details, but now instead of a servant girl, there's a man he's denying it to. In John, first by woman to the fire to the servant girl, everybody agrees on this one, right? Second to an unspecified people at the fire. Okay? Third to a relative of Malchus, and no direct look from Jesus, rooster crow, or immediately after the third. John doesn't include that. So, could Malchus be the other man? Sure. Could Malchus be one of the bystanders? Absolutely. Right? So this is there. Now, if he's speaking in front of a crowd and Matthew focuses on the same servant girl being there, and Mark focuses on, or a different servant girl, and Mark focuses on the same servant girl there, and then Luke focuses on a man being there, and John identifies that man as Malchus. If there's a crowd, there is no conflict, right? These are not. These are differences like you find in all eyewitness testimony if the eyewitness testimony doesn't involve collusion, right? It's people recording from their perspective what they saw, right? So you got variation in deniers, identities, girls versus men, setting, the courtyard versus the fire. Couldn't the fire be in the courtyard? One or two crowings. Additional details like Jesus looks at and is only found in Luke only suggest inconsistencies in eyewitness recollection and narrative focus. Again, Christian scholars reconcile by viewing these as non-exhaustive summaries of a chaotic event with multiple accusers, where the gospel selects different details for emphasis. And Luke's look is for a theological pathos. The core, the three denials, the crowings align, and variations reflect on independent recollections, not contradictions. So scholars, like I said, masters, PhD scholars, they all agree that you can have these differences in the Gospels without them being a problem. But then you get critics like Bart Ehrman come around and they say these are irreconcilable errors from oral transmission, and the reconciliation cite ancient historiography's tolerance for such paraphrasing. Okay? So he's pointing right to like Mike Lucona's work that shows that this is how they wrote. So my rebuttal to the critics is the solution's completely consistent with the compositional standards that we know that was the norm in the first century. I've shown you many dozens of examples where Jesus and the biblical writers paraphrase, right? We looked at books like Why Are There Differences in the Gospels? What can we learn from ancient biography by Mike Licona, that provide evidence that there not only was paraphrasing allowed in the first century historians and biographers, it was the way they were taught to write properly. Proper writing should be done. So if you abandon what I consider this fundamentalist, crazy mindset of what the Bible must be and let the Bible speak for itself, this big, thick book of Bible difficulties becomes a very thin book. Okay? There are still difficulties in the Bible that I can't resolve, but most of them go away like this. And I just thought, since I was focusing on the intertextuality so much, that I should do this. And the reason I did that introduction is because Matthew 27, 1 and 2 starts off with the first difficulty. When morning came, all the chief priests and elders and the people and the council against Jesus to put him to death. We just had the trial last night. What he's telling you is in the morning there's a full trial. And they bound him and led him away to be delivered over to Pilate the governor. Okay? So I just went through this, that Jesus, if you overlap all the Gospels, Jesus went to Ananias first, then Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin. But imagine you're one of if you're new here, I usually catch my typos. I can proofread 5 times and not see them. I catch them when I'm live. The Jewish leaders who want to kill Jesus, or even better, having the Romans kill Jesus, that gives you political cover. And from the public fallout, Jesus has a lot of followers. If the Jewish leaders outright just kill him, they're going to have a problem, right? They want to do it, but they're not going to go knock on the governor's door in the middle of the night after they had the nighttime illegal court and ask Pilate there. They're going to wait until Pilate is up. Hours he would normally be awake. So when morning comes, they bind Jesus and they take him over to Pilate. All you got to do is let the Bible make sense. Let it read like a natural person would read this. and the difficulties go away. And then it says, then when Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, he changed his mind and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. That they said, what is it that to us? See to it yourself. And throwing down the pieces of silver in the temple, he departed, and he went and hanged himself. But the chief priest, taking the pieces of silver, said, it's not lawful to put them in the treasury, since it is blood money. So they took counsel, and they bought with them a potter's field as a burial place for strangers. Therefore, that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what has been spoken of by the prophet Jeremiah, saying, and they took 30 pieces of silver, a price for whom, and a price who had been set by son for the sons of Israel, and they gave them for a potter's field, as the Lord directed me. Now I'm going to leave this slide up because there's so many Bible difficulties in this one slide, or alleged Bible difficulties. I want you to keep it up while I go through this information. Okay? First thing I want to start with is it says this came from Jeremiah, but it's not a quote from Jeremiah. It's taken pieces of Jeremiah chapters 18, 19, and 32, but the 30 pieces of silver come from Zechariah 10, 12, and 13. But Matthew presents this composite allusion to multiple passages in the Old Testament, like it's one quote, right? Now, what it actually says in Zechariah 10, 12, and 13, it says, then I said to them, it seems good to you to give me my wages, but if not, keep them. And they weighed out the wages, 30 pieces of silver, and the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, and the lordly price at which I was priced by them. So I took the 30 pieces of silver, and I threw them into the house of the Lord to the potter. The prophecy is so exacting it's shocking. Where does Judas give the money back to? In the temple, in the house of the Lord. Who ends up with the money? The potter, because they can't accept the blood money, so they go buy a potter's field. Being good Jews, they're not going to leave the 30 pieces of silver on the floor. They convince themselves if they prepay an expense, buying a burial place for strangers. Any strangers that come into Israel and die, they got to get buried somewhere. Someone's got to pay for that. The temple paid for that. So they prepay that expense, and they think that washes their hands of accepting blood money. But look how exacting this prophecy was in Zechariah, and how exacting it's fulfilled in Judas. You would think Matthew would want to address our attention to Zechariah, but he's pulling a bigger theme out of Jeremiah, and given Jeremiah the lead standing in a citation, right? Now Judas does try to return the blood money to the chief priests and elders. They won't accept it because it's blood money. What it says, it's not lawful for us to put it in the treasury since it's blood money. And so Judas is recorded by Matthew as throwing down the pieces of silver in the temple. Another way to say the temple is the house of the Lord. Right? This is exactly what it says in Zechariah. I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of the Lord to the potter. But the prophecy says it goes to the potter. So Matthew records the solution to the problem. They won't accept blood money, but they're going to go buy that potter's field. Isn't that an amazing prophecy? And then when people show you stuff like Nostradamus, and they go, he's a prophet. And he goes, yeah, there'll be two brothers, one born in the morning and one in the evening. And they go, oh, yeah, that's John and Robert Kennedy. Go, whoa, that's a stretch. No, this is biblical prophecy. This is exacting prophecy, right? So let's deal with the alleged Bible difficulty of how Judas died. And Matthew 27:5 indicates that after Judas threw the pieces of silver into the temple, he departed and went and hanged himself. But Acts 1:18 and 19 says, now this man, Judas, acquired a field with the reward of his wickedness, and falling headlong, he burst open in the middle, and all his balls gushed out. And it became known to all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so that the field is called in their own language Akeldama, and that is the field of blood. Okay, so Acts pictures Judas falling headlong, Judas having acquired the field. Judas doesn't own the field, the temple does, right? But they're seeing it as it's his money that bought it, so he's acquiring the field. And they do that. So how scholars work this out is that Judas, right, hung himself in the potter's field, probably in a tree or over a cliff, and was probably left there to rot because people don't want to take him down, right? Because he's up there and he's condemned. They just leave him hanging in a tree, and eventually either the rope breaks or the tree breaks, and his body is all full of gases. When he hits the ground, it explodes. And if you've ever seen an animal that's full of gases inside it explode, it is nasty. And that's what's being pictured in Acts. It's not contradictory. Judas did go hang himself, right? But this is how it goes out. And that's what I'm saying is if you just let the Bible writers write the way we knew they wrote in the first century, all these Bible difficulties just kind of vanished in thin air, right? And then verses 11 and 14. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus said, "You have said so." But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he gave no answer. Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" But he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge. And at that, the governor was greatly amazed. Why was the governor amazed? Because the governor, Pilate, has the power to kill him. He's not even going to answer him. And when he does answer him, he answers him in a sarcastic way. You're the one that said, "I'm the king of the Jews." Just by your question, you're admitting it, right? So after Matthew inserts this periscope about Judas repenting and trying to return the money, right, and committing suicide under the weight of his own guilt, then he continues back to the first verse about them taken to Pilate. Jesus is innocent. The chief priests and Jewish leaders couldn't find any fault in him other than their claim that Jesus was speaking blasphemy about being the Son of God. They tried twisting his words about destroying and rebuilding the temple in 3 days to make it like he's an insurrectionist, right? But none of that would carry any weight with the Romans. What do the Romans care if he's claiming to be the Messiah? But when he identified himself as the Son of Man in the prophecies in Daniel 7:10-14, and we went over this in chapter 26, when Jesus answers them, he identifies himself as that promised king. That Messiah, the Son of Man, in Daniel 7, is given an everlasting kingdom. So they're taking that charge and go, well, this is treason. This is insurrection. We have no king but Caesar, right? It's got to be, he's claiming this. So they bring that charge. They take their religious charge, which won't hold any weight with Pilate, and they turn it into a political charge. All trumped up charges, all fake, but that's what they're going to do. And then he says, do it. But I also find it interesting, Jesus doesn't directly answer Pilate when Pilate asks a question, but he does respond with, "You have said so," right? Indicating that Pilate just called him the king of the Jews in his question. It's like, I do this with atheists sometimes when they say God doesn't exist. And when we define God, the God that they say doesn't exist, they just had to admit God exists in their definition. By their definition, they're basically admitting. And that's what Jesus is calling Pilate, saying, you just acknowledged that I'm the king of the Jews, right? But when he was accused by the chief priest and the elders, he gave no answer. Jesus gives them no answer. And you got to answer why. Why would he answer this pagan Roman governor but not answer the chief priest? And I think he's shown his total disdain for them, the Jewish leadership at the time. Right? He's not even going to respond to them. they're not worth my time to respond to, right? And it's a disdain. And sometimes that's the smarter answer. I get tempted to always answer back when people make charges against you and you want to answer back. But sometimes the smarter move is to say nothing. Just let it go. They're not worth it. You know, it's. I always thought that with the latest thing with Candace Owen and Charlie Kirk's widow. If I was Charlie Kirk's widow, I wouldn't even answer. Candace Owen just making a fool of herself, right? You know, why would you even respond to that? You just let it go and it dies. The more you respond, the bigger it becomes. Jesus doesn't even show them the credit to respond. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release to the crowd one prisoner whom they wanted. And they then had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they had gathered, Pilate said to them, "Who do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Christ, the Messiah, the Anointed One?" Right? For he knew that it was out of envy that they had delivered him up. Besides, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, this is Pilate's wife, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream." Oh, she had a bad dream. Now the chief priests and elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to destroy Jesus. And the governor asked them again, "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to him, "Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called the Christ?" Again, he identifies him as the Messiah. They all said, "Let him be crucified." And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" And they all shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." They don't give him a reason what bad thing Jesus has done. They're just saying, "Crucify, crucify, crucify," right? We want him crucified. But look at Pilate. He's identifying Jesus as whom you call the Messiah, who you call the Christ, Messiah, Anointed Ones, all the same thing. He identifies him as the Messiah, as the Christ, as a righteous man, and keeps saying, he's not done anything wrong. Why am I crucifying this man? But Pilate's got a problem, right? And we're going to see it in these verses. So when Pilate saw he was gaining nothing, but rather a riot was beginning, he took water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." And all the people answered, "His blood be on us and on our children." Then he released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, delivered him to be crucified. Okay, so Pilate's got to answer to Rome if unrest breaks out in Jerusalem. He's the responsible party at charge. He gets a riot breaks out, and that word gets back to Rome. Pilate's the one in trouble, right? They may come in with a Roman army and put down the city and the riot, but Pilate's political career is going to be over. He's got followers of Jesus that could riot. He's got the Jewish leaders that could cause a riot. He's trying to balance what's going on. And he's trying to find out he's done everything he can to let Jesus go. Right? I'll even whip him if you want, and then I'm gonna let him go. They won't give up with anything other than crucifixion. So what he does is his best move is to shift the blame. Remember, the Jewish leaders tried to shift the blame on the Pilate, Rome, for killing Jesus to get out from there. And Pilate shifts it back. And he says, "I'm going to wash my hands of him." Right? And then there was a big controversy in the movie The Passion of the Christ by Mel Gibson. Because in Aramaic, they say, "His blood be on us and on our children." But if you read the subtitles, those words never show up in the subtitles. Because that phrase, that self-imposed curse upon the Jews and their children, has been used by people for all manner of anti-Semitism and hatred against Jews and stuff, and called Christ killers and whatever. So Mel Gibson, being like everybody else, is trying to find the balance. I want to be historically accurate. I want this phrase in there, but I don't need the controversy. So I leave the phrase in Arabic and I take it out in the English subtitles. And you see this. This is what's happening. And so throughout much of modern history, that curse, that blood curse, has been used to justify atrocities against the Jews. And I am absolutely not anti-Semitic. And I'm not suggesting that we should hate Jews or blame them for the death of Jesus. Jesus died for me and you. We're to blame, right? But I do wonder if God has honored their self-imposed curse upon themselves. They called that curse down from heaven on themselves. Is part of what they've suffered throughout history because of that. Maybe. Not saying for sure it is, but I just think that's an interesting question to me, right? Then the soldiers of the governors took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole battalion before him, and they stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and put a reed in his right hand. And kneeling before him, they mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews." And they spit on him and took the reed and struck him in the head. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of his robe, and they put his own clothes on him and led him away to crucify him. Okay, so I got a bunch of colors here because I want you to catch some stuff. I use the English Standard Version in my slides. The English Standard Version's got a bad translation here. It does not say the whole battalion. Okay? A battalion is 5,000 to 6,000 men, right? So 5,280 legionnaires plus other men in there. And they're divided down into smaller groups. The Romans called them cohorts, okay? And I'm just telling you that the word here that they're translating battalion in Greek means cohort or band or company. So we shouldn't expect that there's 5,000 or 6,000, not 500 to 6,000, 5,000 or 6,000 Roman soldiers were involved in mocking and scourging Jesus. That's not correct. Whatever the number is, right? It's a band of Roman soldiers. But by them translating it battalion makes it sound like there is, 5,000 to 6,000 soldiers around there beating them. That's just not factual. That's a bad translation, and I like the ESV, but this is just one area they blow it. Right in the same verse, they blow it on reed. The Strong's word is kalamos. It means staff. They put a staff in his hand and treated him as like king, and then they took the staff away from him and beat him with the staff. Not some weak, limp reed from some plant, some limp reed. It's a staff. It's a big, like walking stick. Is what we're talking about. And they beat him with it. And then I read another argument that argued that Jesus was crucified naked. Okay? And I think Matthew debunks this claim. He does record that the Roman soldiers stripping Jesus of the robe they used to mock him, right? As king. They stripped him of that robe. But Matthew adds the detail, and then they put on his own clothes on him and led him away to crucify him. To me, this makes the idea that Jesus was naked on the cross ridiculous. Okay? But the people that I heard make this claim used that first part of that phrase, they stripped him of the robe, as argument that he was naked, and they left out the part that it says, no, they put his clothes back on him and led him away to be crucified. Okay? So I had to pick a spot to break this chapter up, and this made the most sense. It's not really half. I'm going to try to do this in 2 sessions and finish on Wednesday. I may take 3. Not 100% sure. I'm usually further ahead on my studies than I am right now, but I'll finish this Wednesday study and see if I got to do a third part of Matthew 27 next Monday, but I think I can finish on Wednesday. But this was a good break in the narrative because it's before the crucifixion. And so that's what I'm doing. So I just want you to understand the big part here is that if you just take away these man-made ideas about what the Bible can and cannot do and what it can and cannot say, and let the Bible say what it says, then all these Bible difficulties, all these problems, they seem to vanish, don't they? And when you interpret the Bible using the intertextuality that the biblical writers used and interpret it the way they used it, then you get a different understanding of Scripture, don't you? And that's what I want you to get out of my teaching. So with that, if you're new here, what it is my policy, my practice, that I don't usually talk to the chat until I do the study. And so what I do now is I'm going to put on a song. I'm going to go read the chat. I've seen a lot of comments going on. I will read them and see if there's any that need to be responded to. Sometimes it's just you guys talking to each other, saying hello. And then I'll be back after this song, and then we'll continue.
take me home. You are all I ever need. Jesus, you have set me free. I will worship you alone. You will come to take me home. You are all I ever
You're all I need.
Jesus, you have set me
You set me free.
I will worship you
I will worship you.
You will come to take me home.
I've fallen on my knees.
All right, so I'm back. And Tinka, it doesn't make you a bad person or a messed up person for asking the question. The question you asked is actually many people have asked it. I ask it. Every theologian's ever asked it. Why did Jesus have to die? Couldn't God have? He's loving. Couldn't he have just forgiven us all? Couldn't he have forgiven us? Couldn't he have destroyed the devil and forgiven us all for sin and do that kind of stuff? That would be loving. It wouldn't be just. God is also just. Somebody has to be punished for sin. Now, it's not fair to ask my son to be punished for my sin, right? That's not fair. He might volunteer to do that. The Son of God volunteered to be punished for our sins out of how much he loved us. And for him to do that, he had to, be punished. He had to die. And that's why I spent that time in chapter 26 in the garden, that Jesus says, if there's any other way, take this cup from me. There was no other way. For God to be wholly loving and wholly just, a perfect sacrifice had to be offered. Somebody had to be good enough to accept that sin and to have his death worth all the sins of all mankind. And Jesus is that person. And so it's a good question. It's not a bad question. It's actually a very good question to ask. So with that, I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to kind of land this plane. So let's just do my, what I used to do is my introduction, and we'll do the outro. If you're new here, I teach Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I'm discerning truths on, Donahue Papa on most channels. I call my channel Discerning Truths, but I am Donahue Papa. X, Rumble, D-Live. So that's where you're going to find me. Just search for @Donahue Papa and I'll be there. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at noon Pacific time. And then if you're over on Pilled in the foxhole, in the little comfy bunker that we call foxhole, I'm Bill Donahue, only because I messed up Donahue Papa account and to a point it was unfixable. And so I became Bill Donahue. And then when I finally went to YouTube, I couldn't get Discerning Truths, Donahue Papa, Bill Donahue, none of those names. And YouTube, after about 10 tries, gave me Discerning Truths 534. And no, there are not 533 other ones. There's just me at 534 when I'm there. So I keep my replays. I am able to arrange them on different channels like YouTube and Rumble. On Rumble, there are channels underneath there. And I created 14 channels. This is under New Testament books, and I have Old Testament books. Start here if you're new. Start here is where you want to go. If you're interested in last Friday's subject, there's one called Freaky Fridays. So there's only 14 channels because Rumble wants you to go in and like every single channel. You can't just go like Donahue Papa and think you're set. That's kind of a pain. YouTube, the one good thing that YouTube does is it lets you create as many playlists as you want. And if they like Discerning Truths 534, they don't have to like all the playlists. So I made a playlist specifically for Matthew rather than on Rumble, all the New Testament books are in one channel. And YouTube, each book has its own playlist. So that's better. There you have it. And then my notes, after I'm done and after I make corrections offline that I found online, I will create a PDF and upload my notes at Discerning Truths groups on Telegram. You can download them for free. Use them for your own study. Look up the passages, see if they say what I say they say. Some passages I quote, other passages I just make reference to. And that's for you. On Tuesdays, I join Neil. And based on today's show, I got a feeling we're going to be talking about Psalm 82 tomorrow. Who are the gods in Psalm 82? Who are the other Elohim there that are being judged? Are they Jewish leaders? Are they celestial beings? What's going on? Why do most of your theologians think that they're Jewish leaders? And A few of us think they're clearly the gods from Deuteronomy 32 verses 8 and 9, the sons of God that were set up over men. It makes a big difference in how you understand the Old Testament, how you understand that passage. So with that, I'm going to get out of here for today. God willing, I'll see you all tomorrow at Neo's, and thank you all for joining me.